Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Hong Kong Free Press Live. Tonight, we're lucky to have US lawyer Samuel Bickett with us, who's in the news this week after he was released from prison and deported yesterday from Hong Kong. A court convicted him of assaulting a police officer, but the case is pretty controversial and made global headlines. We'll let Samuel talk us through that incident in December 2019. But first of all, how are you feeling, Samuel? Surely very relieved.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me. I'm exhausted. You can probably see the bags under my eyes. I think mostly for these first few days, I'm hoping to sort of spend some time with some family and relax. But I really wanted to kind of get on here. You guys do such great work, and at least do a little bit. But I'm doing okay. It's been a tough 6 weeks, and especially the last couple of days, transferring from immigration detention and then onto the plane and things like that. But I got in late last night and got a good night's sleep. First time in a real bed for quite a while, so that was really nice. And then in a jet-lagged way, woke up around 5 o'clock this morning, and I'm feeling a little bit more refreshed, and that's great.
What was the period of time you just did? And I guess you've left half your life here, and your dog Moi Moi, and
so
that happened quite quickly.
I was in prison for 6 weeks last summer, and then 6 weeks just now, plus the immigration detention a couple of days. My partner Daniel and my dog are still in Hong Kong, and I guess the plan right now is to get here, and one thing at a time. When you're in prison, is get out of prison, get out of Hong Kong, and then figure things out from there. But hopefully within a month or two, we'll be settled somewhere as I sort of explore what comes next, and then Daniel and Moi will join me as well.
Well, let's bring everyone up to speed and show about a minute or so of that video of the incident. How many years were you in Hong Kong, by the way?
I moved to Hong Kong in 2013, and then I went to study Chinese in Taipei for a couple of years in the middle, but other than that, I've been in Hong Kong since 2013.
So you weren't a permanent resident?
I wasn't, because if you leave in the middle, you lose that opportunity. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's press play on this, and maybe you can just describe what's happening here.
Yeah, so this is the guy that later claimed to be a cop. So you heard him there. He said he's not a cop, and he was raising up to try to hit somebody, and so I reached in to grab the baton. I think what's really important here is you see me sort of clearly just trying to grab the baton and then actually telling him to get up.
So he didn't declare himself as a cop at first.
So at the beginning there, he says no, he's not a cop. So this is actually, and I think most people have only seen this video, but there are CCTV videos that were played at court and that are available on my YouTube channel as well, that show him before all this happens. This guy and another guy who's a prison official holding a child, 13, 14-year-old, and beating him with a baton. So as I walked up into the station, we were just out there shopping, I saw this kid getting beat up by these two people, being held and just beaten in the face. This guy there was choking the kid. As that was happening, another Westerner was asking him, "Are you Popo?" And they were both saying repeatedly, "No." So then I asked them in Mandarin Chinese, "Are you police?" And they both said, "Well, sure, no, we're not police." Then the kid ran away. That guy ran off after him, and that's when that video starts. So the whole thing is on video, but mostly what's been circulated around the internet is just that piece of it. At that point, we're sitting there arguing, and you can hear me as that video starts saying to somebody, he said he's not a cop. They all in Mandarin Chinese, I'm saying, they said they're not police officers. They're just beating up a kid. And so then the guy comes down. He's got his baton in his hand, which is in direct violation of police regulations which we have and which the court refused to let us use. He then walks up to the other foreigner. He immediately shoves him despite nothing being on. That's a criminal assault. He raises his baton to the guy's face. That's a second criminal assault after we've already seen multiple criminal assaults before. And then at that point, I said, I've just seen this guy beat up a kid. He's about to beat up other people. So I reached in to grab the baton. He pulls it away. He then runs after me. This guy, and actually, well, I'll tell you in a second. He trips and falls. And then he pulls me down on top of him. So I whack him and grab the baton. And then I stood there with him until the police come. And everybody there, the guy filming, when the police come, he says, "Oh, here's the criminals." I say, "Here's the criminals." And they say, "Oh, no, this guy is a cop," after he's denied in 2 languages on video that he's a police officer. I think some people have reported this out, but another really critical fact here is he initially accused this kid of sexual assault. And then on the stand at trial, he admitted that he made that up completely. So this kid
that apparently was to get people's attention.
He said it was to get people's attention. So if you think about that for a second, so he said, openly admitted on the stand, that he falsely accused a kid of a serious sexual violent crime in order, it's by his own admission, to persuade random bystanders to intervene, to put themselves in danger in order to beat up this kid, right? This is insane, clearly illegal. You're falsely accusing someone of crime. You're inciting people to commit violence against someone else for no reason. Absolutely nuts. The other aspect of that is what the guy said later is, actually, the kid jumped over a turnstile, so he didn't pay for his MTR ticket. And so the other very, reason why he would accuse the kid of sexual assault is because not paying for your MTR ticket is not an arrestable offense in Hong Kong. It's a fine that's handed out by MTR officials if they catch it. And so he'd admitted in his initial interviews and sworn statements that when he supposedly saw the kid jump over a turnstile, he immediately went and grabbed the kid. So he admitted to a criminal assault for that as well. And so that's why he had to falsely accuse the kid of a crime.
As far as the police and the authorities and twice the court are concerned, you assaulted a police officer, you're convicted. What's your response to them? And as a lawyer yourself, what did you find to be problematic in some of these rulings?
Look, I always hesitate to try to read people's motivations and their inner thoughts and try to focus on what we know about what they've said and things like that. But look, as a lawyer, you say that according to them, this is the case. There is zero chance that anyone that has dealt with this case, the police, Department of Justice, and either of these judges, the magistrate or the judge, there is zero chance that any of them think that I committed this crime. It is just absolutely 100% impossible under the law that they think that. There is a video of this man committing a crime. There's a video of this man saying that he's not a police officer. The crime that they convicted me of says it's not just that you assaulted a police officer in execution of duty. It's a common law crime where you have to know that he's a police officer when you do it. So if I didn't know, then you cannot commit this crime. So even if they believe...
So why did that happen? Is it that you feel that rule of law is broken in Hong Kong, or that the police have, this elevated status within court? Why, if so many people are...
There's a lot of debate there's a lot of debate in my case and in others. One thing I've tried to do with my blog is highlight some of the other cases where... Because I think there's 2 types of cases that we've seen, right, that are unjust, but for different reasons. There's protest cases where you have people that I admire very much who have consciously committed crimes. So they've, unlawfully assembled or things like that in order to protest those laws and to protest certain things. They're committing a crime. They're protesting an unjust law by committing a crime. Conviction kind of makes sense in that sense. Because that's part of the protest, right? This is something that you see with Gandhi and Martin Luther King and that whole thing. You commit a crime in order to sort of protest something else. And that's one category. But I think what you see in my case and what I've been trying to highlight on my blog is a second category, which is where, increasingly, particularly in the last year since the national security law, you're seeing people who have not committed crimes. There was one Jimmy Lai case that I highlighted on my blog. There was a Chow Hong Tung case as well, where magistrates are simply making up facts. And you can look at the evidence yourself. It's available. And you can see where magistrates and judges are just simply making things up. And I think there's a lot of debate in Hong Kong. I think if you ask your typical, pro Hong Kong, person, I hear more often than not, people think, oh, these judges are being bribed or blackmailed, or somebody from China has done that. I think that's possible in some cases. I certainly wouldn't put it past the Chinese government to do that. But I actually think what's happening more often than not is these, you have somebody like Arthur Lam, the magistrate in my case, or Esther Cho and the appellate judge. I think more likely these people are just absolutely sycophantic cowards who have zero conception of their role as lawyers and as judges as being about a higher calling and a profession. And they see themselves solely as sort of civil servants whose only goal is to get promotions. So I think that these are people who, from the beginning of their careers, when the British were in charge, they sycophantically sucked up to the British, and now then the Hong Kong government was in charge, so they sycophantically sucked up to them. And then now that the police are effectively running this city, they sycophantically suck up to them. And I think these are just incredibly unprincipled people who have no real concept of ethical standards or professional responsibility in their cases.
Some strong words, and I think
yeah,
you must.
My words are getting a bit more.
Yeah. Well, you're bound to feel this way after the last 48 hours. Anyway, I mean, whether it's that you had some faith in the system or your sheer stubbornness, you appeal this, and I have to wonder, I think a lot wonder, that if you had have stayed in Hong Kong, and perhaps this is related to why they deported you, you might have continued to appeal this perhaps all the way up to the Court of Final Appeal. Was that your plan?
I still have the right to appeal. And so a little bit.
How would that work if you're abroad?
Through my lawyers.
So
what we've done now, so while I was in prison, so typically, unsurprisingly, a prisoner has a right to meet with their lawyers. In the last 2 months, and and I'm going to try to write some about this because it's insane. In my 2 months or 6 weeks in prison this time, in the interest of zero COVID, right? I mean, they've shut out everything. We had zero contact with the outside world. They've prohibited prisoners from seeing their lawyers. They've prohibited prisoners from going to court. I haven't seen my lawyers or spoken to my lawyers since the upholding of the verdict 6 weeks ago. But in the next couple of days, I'll sit down with them. My lawyers just wrote to the court and said, we're being prohibited from seeing our clients, so we can't follow on the appeal right now. So that's sort of in a holding pattern. But the intention is still to appeal. What we've done is we've hired a new senior counsel, Derek Chan, who has gone through, and my understanding is he's got some grounds that he wants to propose appealing on to the Court of Final Appeal. And so once I speak to my lawyers, I'll see what those grounds are and see, I have one ground in particular. I won't get into the details that I think is the most important. So it's a question of whether we agree. But as things stand, my intention is still to appeal to the Court of Final Appeal, and we should have more information on that in a few days. And if we make that filing, then we'll certainly let everybody know.
Super interesting. I want to go back to your stubbornness though, because I think there's just shock and awe, I think, over just how you'd managed to engage the international media, on this. And also in that time when you were on bail, pending your appeal, you were pretty outspoken. You were all over Twitter. You'd launched a newsletter. You were staging protests on behalf of others who were behind bars. Very outspoken. I mean, you must have been aware of the risks of that. What motivated it? And did you ever feel unsafe doing so?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but I mean, number one, yes, I every single morning I would wake up and kind of thank God that I hadn't had a 4 a.m. knock on the door from the police. We had plans and backup plans and backups of backups of exactly what needed to happen if that happened. And for Hong Kong Free Press or any media, I'm sure this is something that is very relatable, right? It's always the question if you're being outspoken or if you're simply just doing your job as media or as a lawyer, is this the day that these criminal police officers are going to show up at my door and throw me in prison without trial for the next 5 years? And so, yeah, that was always a risk. With that said, I really appreciate all Hong Kongers who, talk about how, oh, you're so brave and things like that. And I appreciate that. But, my bravery was, I guess, also buttressed by the fact that I have certain privileges that a lot of Hong Kongers would not have. I think if I was a local Hong Konger with a Hong Kong passport and I had said the things that I had said, I would have disappeared into the prisons a long time ago. I think one thing that's interesting, and I think it really is as revealing as anything about how utterly political and lawless these national security arrests have been, is that so far the police have drawn the line where they just simply won't charge foreigners who are in Hong Kong and arrest them under the national security law. That's because every decision they're making on this thing is political and it has nothing to do with what's actually legal or anything like that. So for me, I had some privileges that allowed me to do it, and I felt quite a responsibility to do that. I'm sure I could have taken it too far, and there was always a danger, but fortunately, they that line that they didn't want to cross managed to hold, and I managed to leave the city. As for so
it seems you recognize there was. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, as for the sort of, what caused me to sort of do this, in the first several months after my arrest, it was just sort of this weird denial. The police that arrested me and my lawyers and we would sit there and we'd be like, well, surely let's just write the police. They're not going to charge him. And then they charged me. And then we went to the Department of Justice. We wrote letters to the DOJ being like, you guys know that, have you seen the videos in this case? Have you realized that this police officer falsely accused, we wrote these letters and we're just like, well, yeah, obviously they're going to drop these charges. Clearly the DOJ has been tricked by the police. They have no idea what's going on. We're like, this is just going to go away. And then they didn't drop the charges. And so after a few months of that, where I was like, this is just going to go away and I'm going to move on to my life. I kind of had that moment. What's that meme where there's a guy and he's sitting there and his dog is sitting on his face and it just says this is my life now, right? And I kind of had that feeling, right? Okay, I used to be a corporate lawyer and now this is my life now. I have been put into this situation, and I can either quietly kind of fight it and try to make it go away, or I can use this as an opportunity to kind of do things that I've wanted to do for a long time, which is to try to, stop just kind of being a corporate lawyer for rich people and do something useful for the world. And, I didn't choose this, but this is my chance to kind of do things that I care about and talk about things that I care about. And so I said, well, this is my life now. And so that's what I'm going to do. So I went 100% full on into it and said, if this is my life now, let's just do it. And yeah, that's how we ended up. And I haven't regretted it for a second. I think this is, I'm a person of faith, and I think that sometimes I really do think that sometimes in life things are handed to you for a reason, and I think that this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
It must be good to be reunited with family. Were they behind you throughout this?
Oh yeah, they were worried, obviously, but they're really proud. My parents are old hippies they were civil rights protesters and Vietnam War protesters and things like that. I tell people I think my mom has probably punched a cop at some point. They're very proud. They're relieved that I'm home. Certainly, I'm here. I'm staying in DC with my brother and his. I promised my 6-year-old nephew Killian. I promised I would show the Hong Kong Free Press his Legos, which he's very proud of. So I said, I'll show him the video, and he's got
good job.
Yeah. He's got quite a Lego collection, which I've been learning all about. But I'm so relieved to be here and see. I haven't been here in several years now, and it's nice to be back for sure.
Yeah, I bet. Last few questions. You were specifically told you would not be able to return again. How did the deportation process work? You're in a cell, and next thing you know, you're on a plane. Were you accompanied whilst on the plane? What happened?
Yeah. So on the first part of that, what they told me, it was this weird thing. So I was in immigration custody at the airport, and they handed me a letter, and they were like, sign this. And it says, please be aware that if you, it's something like, if you apply to return to Hong Kong, your application will be looked at very closely and will likely be denied. And I was like, I asked the guy, I was like, what is this letter? Does this mean I can't go into Hong Kong again or what? And he was like, yeah, I mean, that's the language. He was like, but that means you can't come back into Hong Kong. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, I kind of figured that, and it wouldn't be safe for me anyway. But we had actually applied. I had a separate immigration lawyer who spent the last couple months, letter after letter and phone call after phone call, trying to get me a visitor visa or a visa extension, and they just denied everything. They were like, you need to go. And then we just tried to get, we were like, look, I mean, he's lived here for years. Can he just have a few days to pack up his stuff and sort of spend some time with his family and friends and get out of town on his own? And they said no to that. So at my release, I was immediately handed over to immigration detention. I spent the full day there. And then they took me to the airport from there. And it's funny, it's five immigration officers following me. Perfectly nice guys, by the way. I mean, the policies are what's wrong. I mean, it's not that anybody from any of these individual guys did anything particularly bad. But they took me through and waited until I got on the plane. And I thought, well, then, okay, it's over now. So I said, I'll give you my passport. And they're like, no, you'll get your passport when you land in Istanbul, because I had a connecting flight to Istanbul. So I get to Istanbul and I said, give me my passport. And they say, no, we have to give it to Istanbul authorities. So they gave it to the Istanbul authorities. And I'm sitting there arguing with these guys. I'm like, what authority do you guys have to hold my passport? And I specifically say, what law? Is it a Hong Kong law that you're following here in Istanbul? Or is it, a Turkish law? And they said, well, it was what they call a routine request from the Hong Kong authorities that they hold me captive until I got back to the United States. And I was like, and you followed this order? I mean, none of it made any sense. As far as we can gather at the time, speaking through this, we got in touch with some contacts. My sister works at the State Department here in Washington, and she was jumping on, and apparently this is highly illegal. This is not, a government cannot take your passport and then hand it over to private staff of an airline and keep it from you. None of it makes any sense. So the Turkish authorities, they held me and wouldn't let me get my passport back, wouldn't let me leave. They did give me some free range to kind of move around in sort of the immigration area and then nearby and stuff. So it's not like I had to sit in a room for the whole time, but I was very much not a free man, that's for sure. So then at that point, when the flight came, they took me back. They gave my passport again to these private staff of the airline who were prohibited from giving it back to me. Finally, once we got to DC, the staff of the airline, they were like, I'm so sorry. The staff of this is Turkish Airlines, and one of them even was like, we know what's going on in Hong Kong. This is insane. I have no idea what's going on. We've never been told to hold somebody's passport like this before, but they did. And they were instructed to give it to an American official who met us at the plane. The American official looked at the airline staff, and I couldn't quite hear, but it looked like it was kind of saying, it was just a confused look. What am I doing with this, right? And then as I walked up, he turned and he said, "Oh, is that the guy?" And the airline staff said, yeah, that's him. And he just kind of said, here, and he walked away. I mean, the American official was like, what the hell is going on? Why do I have your passport? And that was it. I went through customs and had no problem getting into the U.S. from there.
Three more questions. I suppose many have a morbid curiosity, and I think you've already written about this, but what was it like in Hong Kong prison, aside from the COVID restrictions you mentioned? What was it like doing time?
Yeah, so I mean, my two experiences in prison were quite different experiences because there was the COVID restrictions this time. I'll talk about that in a second. But last summer is sort of the more normal time. It's a Hong Kong prisons are kind of weird because they still kind of have the holdover from sort of a rights-based common law system. So you have a number of rights and things like that. But a lot of what they do, the way prisoners describe it is just kind of like everything is fake, right? There are huge numbers of regulations in place, but whether they're followed or not, largely it's kind of about appearances. So there's sort of inspections every day, but they're not real inspections. There's certain things that you're supposed to be entitled to that you just kind of can't get. But then it's certainly not as bad as it could be, right? I mean, you get the food is decent. The guards are by and large pretty friendly. The only only official violence. Oh, this is a great story, and I'm going to write about this as well. But the only time I saw violence from guards was when I was living in the hospital for reasons I won't get into, but related to the COVID stuff. This past time, there was one incident one night where we heard noise and then looked out, and a group of guards was just beating the crap out of a prisoner. And that was the only violence that I saw. I think what's very interesting about that situation, I spoke to some of the other prisoners and they said, I was like, does this happen elsewhere? I've never seen it anywhere else in the prisons. They said it's famous that it happens here in Lai Chi Kok Hospital. That the prison guards in Lai Chi Kok Hospital will beat up prisoners. The incredibly interesting thing, the guard, the senior officer who runs Lai Chi Kok Hospital is the second attacker in my case, in that video that you saw. So the guy who was holding the kid in the CCTV video while the other guy beat him. So this is the type of quality people that are running the Hong Kong prisons, are people who attack kids on the street and then are supervising as their guards beat up prisoners. Other than that, however, there was generally the guards are pretty mild. I would say, I didn't see, I think it does happen sometimes, but I didn't see any sort of politically motivated discrimination against political prisoners. If anything, most guards treat political prisoners a little bit better because whatever the guards' political beliefs, there seems to be a pretty good consensus that like these people should not be in the prison. What I think you do see that, the biggest unfairness you see is that if I have some friends in prison who, not political prisoners, who have spoken out about certain things. They've filed complaints about their rights, trying to seek their rights, filed lawsuits. Those guys get singled out. The guards will find any excuse to throw them in solitary confinement and things like that. And really what that's motivated about is that most of these guards, they're perfectly nice, but they are lazy. If you make them do work, if you make them testify, if you make them do anything, then they will retaliate against you. And in a system where there are hundreds of rules on paper that are simply not followed on a day-to-day basis, it's very easy for guards to then take one of those rules and say, for you, who I don't like, now I'm enforcing this rule against you. And I think that's quite a concerning thing in the prisons themselves.
Were you put to work in prison?
For part of it. So this past time, there was very little work because everybody was on a lockdown. And I don't know if we have time to get too much into that. The lockdown thing, I am going to write about that as well. It's really concerning what they've done. There have been prisoners that I met this past time who have been in a tiny cell for 6 weeks, not allowed out except every 2 days for a shower. And people are really, really suffering in there during the supposed COVID lockdowns. At the same time, the guards. I saw an interview yesterday with the commissioner for the prisons who said, "Oh, we're really fighting the virus. We're doing our best." They're not fighting the virus at all. They're locking down the prisons and causing people great suffering. And then the thing that they could actually do to try to control the virus, they're not actually doing anything about it, which is testing. So every morning they walk up, they hand you a test. And basically, if you test positive, they make it clear to you, you will lock down every single person in your entire work group. So potentially dozens or more people will be locked down for 10 days, unable to leave their cell. So then they walk away. And so everybody takes out their test. You do the test. If you test positive, then you go find yesterday's test and you replace it. So there's actually no real commitment within the prison system to track down the virus at all. All that I've seen is that they're using the virus as an excuse to cause an enormous amount of suffering for these prisoners by shutting down visits, locking people in their cells, for reasons that completely defy explanation, causing a 2+ week delay on any letters, denying people going to court. So you have people who have not been charged with a crime, or at least not been been in a courtroom for a crime, who are sitting there in purgatory for months on end because they can't go to court. People are not allowed to see their lawyers. They're not allowed to see the consulates. All of this, everything has been shut down, and then actually doing anything to stop the virus is not happening at all. And sorry, I just rambled a lot, but you asked if I worked. This time I worked for about 5 or 6 days. Otherwise, I was in lockdown the entire time. Last summer, I worked in the laundry for the last several weeks.
So it seems like you're kind of disincentivized to be confessing to having COVID there.
Yeah.
Last couple of questions.
And to be clear, but I mean, they know what's going on. And this is typical CSD, Correctional Services, is these guards and all the way up to the commissioner, I promise you, they know full well that they're handing you these tests knowing that people are going to cheat on them. It's designed that way. Everything is about appearances for these guys. It's about creating a paper trail that they're pretending to do what they're supposed to do. And then they actually deliberately design it this way. I guarantee you that they do.
What's your plan now, Samuel? And you're going to continue writing, you say, in the podcast. You have a newsletter. What's next, job-wise even?
I don't have a podcast, but I have my newsletter, which I'll keep writing. And I started that newsletter thinking that, because I think, obviously people are talking a lot about the political issues, and there are a couple guys who write some really great stuff. There's the Georgetown Center here that does some really good stuff and things like that about the specific Hong Kong legal issues. But I had a lot of time, and so I want to do some more on that and sort of monitoring the courts and trying to highlight some of the really problematic decisions that are coming out, and potentially branch that out in some more legal stuff. My thinking of it is, I obviously have a lot of political opinions, but there's not much I can add from a political standpoint. But as a lawyer, there's quite a bit I can, hopefully contribute. My goal, I think, like I said, this is my life now, so I kind of jumped right into it. I'd really like to, land somewhere where I can kind of focus full time on continuing to do some of this work for Hong Kong and related to China, human rights, and potentially Asia. My particular, primary, most narrow interest is in rule of law and development of rule of law. So hopefully I can, land somewhere where I can continue working on that. I think that's track one. Track two, right, is sort of kind of creating a record of my experience. So talking to media about what I've gone through and sort of using that to highlight the situation in Hong Kong to an international audience, as well as, potentially, talking to the government here as for anything that might be helpful. And I'd like to write a book. I say that I actually don't really want to write a book. It sounds quite tedious, actually, but I actually think it's quite, the more I think about it, I think it's important to create a record, and I know a lot of people are doing it. Nathan wrote his book, and I haven't read the whole thing, but I read part of it, and that kind of thing really made me realize, we're living history, in Hong Kong. And some of us that have gone through it, I think, really need to write these things down and get it out there. And so whether, I start that immediately or sometime before too long, I'll hopefully get it all down on paper and get something out as well. But my current plan for the next couple of days is to build some Lego sets with my nephew and spend some time with my family and regroup a little bit, because I don't know if you can tell, but I am burned out, and so I'm
man. Okay.
Days of recuperation.
Well, and by the way, you were on a podcast. You don't have a podcast. I recall this now.
That's right. Yeah.
You mentioned in your kind of farewell message that you hope to return to Hong Kong when times are different, perhaps, or free. Do you really think that day would come in your lifetime? And what is your message to Hong Kongers?
Yeah, and I mean, the language I use is that I have faith that it will. And I think faith is a funny thing, right? That it's a different thing from certainty. I didn't write I'm certain, but it's a belief that things will work out, and I think they will. I hope that happens in my lifetime. I think that as we sort of look at, especially I think these last 6 weeks, if people didn't know how utterly rotten and incompetent this government is before these past 6 weeks, I think it's become pretty common knowledge at this point as the way that they've the epic disaster of how they've handled these COVID lockdowns and things like that. I don't see how this government can survive for much longer, but maybe that's wishful thinking. I hope that one day in our lifetime, and I hope that I can work towards this, and everyone else who cares about Hong Kong and work towards this, we can see a better Hong Kong, one that's representing its people, and more than that, hopefully get to a point where we can see some justice against some of these criminals in the police and in the leadership of the government. And I don't think we should seek vengeance or anything like that, but there's a hope in me that we can see some consequences for these people in our life, and that those of us who are now, I guess, exiles from the city that we love, can be able to go back into the city and see it accomplish the goals that we've all been hoping for many years.
Well, Samuel Bickett, thank you very much for joining us. Get some rest. Samuel Bickett, who served time, has maintained his innocence, and was deported from Hong Kong a day or two ago. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Tom. Take care.